Hey, I'm Medicine Mary and welcome back to my channel. Today I have a manga recommendation video. So today's manga recommendation video is going to be recommending you manga based off of book series. So this idea spanned from a live show I did. During that live show I was asked about a similar manga for people who enjoyed Akrita, A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J Maas, and that kind of spanned this whole idea of, you know, thinking if you like certain books, what mangas could you then try? The only thing I do have to preface this with is the fact that I really could not come up with any manga to kind of suit Akrita. There are not very many fae-centric mangas out there, and especially when it comes to the very heavy fantasy romance that Akrita is. Fantasy is a lot more male-centric in the manga world, and to find fantasy romance is a lot more difficult with the heroine because they're not as strong as some of the ones that we see in YA literature. That is not to say that there are none out there, but there are none that really are fully encompassing what Akrita is as a series. But yeah, the first series I'm going to give you a recommendation for is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. A great manga alternative to Nevernight is going to be Akame ga Kill. I absolutely adore Akame ga Kill. I originally watched it as an anime and it was unlike anything I'd ever watched before. It is extremely cutthroat. The females in this are really badass and they're all looking for revenge, which is very similar to our main character Miyako there in Nevernight. So Akame ga Kill actually follows Tatsumi. He is a young villager who decides to travel to the capital in order to raise money to save his home. But when he gets there, he ends up finding out that it is actually a very, very corrupt capital, much like Nevernight. And he actually ends up coming into contact with the Night Raiders. Now the assassin group Night Raiders is known to kind of quell the corruption going on, even if they are a little bit evil themselves in certain ways. It is an awesome group, and it is actually Akame who is the female leader of the team, who is most like Mia. So even though she's not technically the main character of this series, I think that she actually is, because it's just my own opinion, and if you know how this goes, you'll also understand what I mean. Akame is looking for revenge. She's very skilled and she's trained a lot, and she's an assassin, unlike our character Miyako there, and it is a series that does not hold back on its punches. It does a lot of crazy stuff, which is just like the way that Jay Kristoff writes his books, and so I very much recommend it. My next recommendation is going to be for the Percy Jackson series. This is a middle grade series that does get adult as you keep on going through it, and it follows Perseus Jackson, who is the descendant of Poseidon. And the whole journey is about them trying to prevent Kronos from awakening and coming back and reigniting all the Titans. Now, I had a bit of a difficult time with this just because I have a lot of great series that are similar to this, but they're not necessarily as middle grade as Percy Jackson is. But if you are kind of more of a young adult who is reading the Percy Jackson series, or if you read Percy Jackson as a kid and it was something that you really enjoyed, I highly recommend Ma. Now, March-in Awakens romance, I know that the word romance is in the title, but that's not really the main focus of this. Even though Percy Jackson does have a romance in it, like this does, it is not the focus of the series. The focus is actually our main character, who is the chosen one, and that is very similar to what happens in this. This is actually a series that I read before I actually even read the Percy Jackson series. So I was quite young when I read this, and I didn't think that the content was that adult in it personally, but it just kind of depends on you as a person. My brother and I are huge fans of this. It is a 15-volume series, and I adore it. We follow Ginta, and he lost his dad a couple of years ago. He went missing, and his dad used to have these stories of this other world, and how he used to dream of it, and always want to travel there. And then Ginta starts having these dreams of this other world, and of this girl there. And then one day he ends up being sucked through a portal and ends up in this world. And when he gets there, he is suddenly unlike he ever was before. He can see without his glasses on. He's a lot stronger, and he is just completely amazed by what's happening. But when he gets there, he kind of takes on the role of the chosen one by finding out that in this land there are these people called the chess pieces, and they are ruled obviously by King, and King is kind of trying to take over, and it's just not a very great way that this world is being ruled. And so Ginta, alongside some other people who you meet along the way, including the wonderful witch named Dorothy, who is one of my favorites of all time, they all end up teaming together to participate in the chess games, which is a tournament between regular arm wielders against the chess pieces, and if you manage to beat all the way to the top, you end up versing the king. When I say arms, this is the way this world works, is that there is jewelry pieces, and these jewelry pieces transform into weapons. Dorothy, for instance, as a witch, she collects arms, so you know, she has this bracelet with a dog on it and it transforms into this like massive dog, and it's just like, it's really cool. It's a very standard shonen manga, and I love this series so much. I cannot recommend this manga enough. It is really one of my favorites, and if you have not checked it out, please do, because it is an oldie, but it's such a goodie. Now, for fans of One of Us is Lying, or just any general YA school set thriller, I would recommend Arisa. That's not the right way. Arisa by Natsumi Ando. Natsumi Ando is one of my favorite mangakas, so obviously I recommend her all the time, but Arisa is a thriller shoujo manga. And for those of you who are unaware of manga terminology, shoujo and shonen are the two main terms when it comes to manga, and shonen tends to be boys manga, which tends to be a male protagonist and action-based, and then we have shoujo manga, which follows a female protagonist and tends to normally be more contemporary. So we follow twins, Tsubasa and Arisa. Their parents are separated, so they don't live together. Tsubasa goes to a public school, kind of just does what she wants. She's rough and tough, and you know, she skips classes and she goes out to parties and she just has the time of her life. And then Arisa's more like the perfect student. She, I think, is like part of the student council at her private school, and when the story starts off, you find out that Arisa ended up jumping out of a window to try and commit suicide, but she didn't succeed and she ends up actually in a coma. Tsubasa ends up finding out that Arisa has been keeping some dark secrets, especially about her school and her classmates, and so Tsubasa decides to go undercover at Arisa's school in order to find out what really happened. There are some very sinister things going on. It is really interesting. I remember a lot of the times I was like, I think it's this person, and then I was like, no, it's this person, and then I would go back to someone else, and it was like a whole ordeal going on. And I just really love Natsumi Ando's art style. She's just one of my favorites, once again. And I highly recommend it if you are a fan of YA thrillers, because this is definitely going to be up your alley. I wanted to come up with a book that was like Shadow and Bone, which is the Grishaverse trilogy by Leigh Bardugo. This is a very typical fantasy novel following the chosen one trope, and a girl with multiple love interests, and her kind of coming into her own power and awakening, and the choices she has to make for the better of the whole country. And so I was like, well, what's a quintessential kind of female fantasy that I could recommend? And I decided to go with Yona of the Dawn by Mizuho Kusanagi. I think that even if you were a little bit 50-50 on the Grishaverse trilogy because you thought Alina was maybe a bit too stereotypical and a bit too predictable, and maybe sometimes her decisions you were like, that's kind of dumb, I think you would actually even more prefer this, because Yona is actually really amazing as she grows into herself. She has so much character development. Yona is a princess. She is the only princess of her kingdom. As such, she has her own personal guard named Huck. He has been around her since she was a kid, and they're kind of like best friends. They banter all the time, and he's really awesome because he comes from a specific clan that has some special things about them. But what ends up happening is that Yona's father is murdered by the last person she would ever expect, and so she ends up having to go on the run because her life is now in danger. And this person who killed her father, the Emperor, has now decided to take it upon himself to become the Emperor. So Yona is now in hiding, and as a result, she's, you know, no longer sheltered for the first time in her life. She's on the run with Huck, and she's kind of learning to come into herself and learning, you know, to stand on her own 2 feet for once and grow a backbone and learn how to fight for what she wants and to protect what she loves. The romance in this is very slow burn. It's very sweet. It is childhood friends to lovers, which is, you know, like, I was about to spoil if you didn't know who she ended up with in this series. The childhood friend in this is a lot better and a lot more attractive and hot. So this is like an even better version. My next recommendation is a little bit more broad because there are multiple books I could relate this manga to. So if you are a fan of smut, I have a recommendation for you, because before I even started reading smut, I started reading a little bit more explicit manga. So I have one that is really one of my all-time favorites. There are some instances in it where it is non-consensual consensual, so if you are aware of that occurring in your smut, if you are a reader of more dark romances, this is definitely going to be for you. and that is going to be Honey x Honey Drops. So this series has 8 volumes and it came out in the early 2000s, and whew, do I love it. Okay, so we're following Yuzuru, and she is just a typical high school student. She is working part-time to help pay for her schooling. Her parents are pretty poor and, you know, they really struggle to kind of get by. During summer break, she ends up getting into a sticky situation with a guy named Kai. He is one of the rich and affluent people at her high school, and at this high school, the most rich and the most elite are part of a course called the Kuhe course. And basically, the rich and the affluent, each of the members in this society, have their own honey. And a honey is basically a servant that they have at the school. Romance upon the honeys is very looked down upon because normally the class difference is what the whole problem is, and it is not an okay thing. They're very affluent rich people, and they have these honeys because they have the monetary value of having the honeys. Yuzuru ends up having to become Kai's honey because of this situation that she got herself into, and there are actually some benefits to being a honey. It means that she no longer has to pay tuition for school, and she actually gets to attend the same school programs as Kai does, which are the more upper level and the better courses. So it is great in that aspect, except for the fact that Kai has never managed to have a honey for longer than like a couple of weeks or a couple of days because he ends up running them all off, or they end up just getting really upset at him, and he just never likes to listen to his honeys. And if a honey does not end up getting their master to do what they need to do, they get completely expelled from the program, and it's just a huge problem. So I really love the series, and the master-servant relationship between the two of them definitely becomes very sexual very quickly, and it is just so steamy and delicious, but then it ends up being such a beautiful romance, and I cannot brag about this one enough. It's just a very specific audience will like this manga, so I have to be a little bit careful about who I recommend it to. And then the last one I want to recommend is if you are a fan of pop star romances. So this is once again a more general one. I've read a couple of pop star romances during my time, like, you know, when you read about like the girl who's on like her summer break, and while she's at the country she ends up meeting this guy and it turns out he's actually a rock star or like a country singer. It's any of those romances, if that's something that you've ever liked. One of the ones I'm thinking of maybe is Permanent Record or Somewhere Only We Know. The recommendation I have for you is Kiss Me at the Stroke of Midnight. This is by Rin Mikimoto, and I own this series, but it is currently in storage for me. It was actually just finished this year in May, so there are 12 volumes. So we follow Hinata Hanazawa, and she's a very diligent, hard-working, honest student at her high school, but she secretly yearns for a fairy tale romance. She is a huge softie, but she doesn't let anyone see that. And then the very popular movie actor Cade Ayasa ends up coming to her school to film some scenes for his upcoming movie, which is high school based, and she ends up appearing as an extra because she goes to the school, and they end up meeting, and he ends up falling for her, and it is their romance, which they have to keep secret and then not so secret, and it's like that whole like famous person, regular person romance. And there were, in the beginning, I will admit, I was a little bit like, a little too cheesy, you know. He was the typical like male love interest who, I can't remember, was it panties? He loves panties, and I don't normally use the word panties, but when I talk about manga I always do, because to me panties correlate to manga, anime, just the way that it is. And I mean, for people who aren't maybe used to it, it will seem really weird to you, and it's just something you kind of have to get over as a hump, but yes. So those are my couple of recommendations on if you like these books, try these mangas. If you did like this recommendation, let me know. I do have others planned if you do like this idea. And yeah, that's it for this video. If you did enjoy it, please hit the like button down below. If you want to see more of me, please subscribe to my channel. And until next time, thanks a bunch guys. Bye!